You've reached the Homer Hotline with Dr. Kevin Solis. Please stand by.
It's about boxing, not baseball. It's about more. It's about Maurice Sendak, not The Simpsons. This is the Homer Hotline. I'm here today with Professor Helen Lovatt from the University of Nottingham. Greetings, Helen.
Hi, Kevin. Great. Thanks very much for having me on.
It is my pleasure. There's so much interesting that we could talk about in a purview like this, about Homeric stuff and related issues, and then what you have worked on. So it's very exciting to have you here.
I'm definitely not a Homerist, so I've got a little bit of imposter
I
syndrome.
know. See, this is interesting. I began this project. You are indeed not a Homerist. I began this project by interviewing Andrew McClellan, who's my friend, my personal friend, who's at UC San Diego, and he wrote that book on abused bodies in Roman epic.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah, and so we were in PhD together at UBC, and I wanted to start this thing, but I wanted to start it in a comfortable atmosphere. So I asked to interview Andrew, and so he was also like, "I'm a Romanist," like. You are the second verifiable Latinist, Romanist person who says, "I'm not a Hellenist," on a regular basis.
I mean, I basically come at Homer through Statius. So I'm basically, I'm there with the attitude that I'm thinking about Homer as if I were Statius, which I think does give a bit of a weird perspective. And I have to, keep critiquing myself on that.
That's interesting, but so I can't think myself into that position. I know a little bit about Statius, but I don't have specialized training in Statius. So it's just interesting to me. In some sense, thinking about Homer from the archaic Greek or archaic Greek literature perspective is the easiest, and it's not easy. But then you're talking about a few stages removed, like the Silver Latin. Looking at Homer, right? Which is, there's more variables in your looking at Homer.
In some ways, I mean, what the effect that it has is that obviously the view that would have been probably most common in that period would be that Homer was a poet who wrote these poems. And so that it skips out on a lot of debates in current Homeric studies. And in some ways, it presents a more simplified view of the Homeric tradition because, Statius sees himself as a successor of Homer, who is basically doing the same thing.
Right. So I wasn't planning on this, but I have to ask you about epic games and your contribution to that wonderful Structures of Epic project. What will you tell our listeners just sort of synopsis of your chapter on epic games there and what it was like contributing to Structures of Epic?
That was an interesting piece to write. So it was taking me back to the beginning of my academic career, where I wrote my PhD on basically on reading Statius Thebaid through the epic games in book 6 of the Thebaid, and then also reading the whole of the epic tradition through games and through Statius's version of them. And so I spent a lot of time with Iliad 23. I also got drawn down a rabbit hole of trying to find epic games in Apollonius, which I argued were scattered across the poem, but were never allowed to have their own episodic place. I don't think I've ever really fully developed that line, which was just a footnote in the PhD.
But that's an important idea. We can dwell on that for a second. Just say that's an important idea because these things became set pieces, and they were probably set pieces for the first performers whose work we have recorded here. That is the Homeric poems. They were probably already expected parts of the epic. Hey, I'm going to sing an epic. Oh, I better have one of these. And then we have Roman authors eschewing certain of them. And Virgil doesn't like a feasting scene. He doesn't do many feasting scenes.
He alludes to them without giving them much space.
Right. And then so here we're talking about a Hellenistic author writing in Greek, and he's eschewing something.
Yeah,
for
I
some
think
reason. That's interesting.
I think it's pretty clear that games played a big role in the Argonaut stories in earlier versions, and certainly the penal games for Pelias are very important. Now, obviously, that's after the end chronologically, or well, probably in most versions after the end chronologically, where Apollonius stops. So he's got a reason for keeping out of them, but he could so easily have included them if he'd wanted to. And
Sure.
it's far too straight epic. It's not, it's not Callimacheian enough epic for him. And the games have this like high epic nature of them, while at the same time being a sort of prelude, a rehearsal, a reflection, a meta textual version of epic.
Quite right.
And I was really fascinated by when I came at it, I was most interested in games and realities. So that's what I wanted to call the book. And I came at it through Ian M. Banks's The Player of Games, which is a science fiction book that is around board games, and it has these sort of fantastically imagined board games which sort of become the universe. And so
like Jumanji.
Exactly. Yeah. So thinking about that, the ways that people go from viewing to being part of the spectacle, and that boundary is always sort of permeable. That was what fascinated me about the Roman spectacles, and epic games as well. So like here, Achilles is the producer. He's not involved, right. But in other situations, he would have been winning them all. So it's such a fascinating situation to be in. Absolutely. And I was really, really interested in the ways that the historicism of the Roman games was sort of different. That they were negotiating between their own systems of spectacle and what they inherited from earlier epic poetry.
Yeah.
And the different ways that each author did that was really fascinating. So that Virgil really sort of pushes away the Homeric precedent, whereas Statius sort of brings it back and tries to negotiate between the two.
That's amazing. And so, like your work there, that project sounds similar to me to what Anya Bettenworth did with the banquet scene in Epic. So you would have you were aware of this person?
Yep.
Anya Bettenworth and her work on feasting. And then she's got this book in the Hypomnemata series that's the epic feasts from Homer to the latest Roman epic. So it sounds a bit, and the kind of,
it wasn't what I set out to do. It was just that when you work on Statius, you have the whole of epic, whether you like it or not, because because that's what sort of poet he is.
Right, and that's what he had at his fingertips, and you don't have quite as much as he had at his fingertips.
The cyclic epics.
He had more epics to look at than we have to compare with him, and it's like
and also loads of other, it's clear that his father taught some really, really outre and bizarre things that people don't talk about much. So he was a real nerd, Greek poetry nerd.
He was one of us.
Yeah.
I wish I could call him up on the Homer hotline. I call Statius up, but instead of calling Statius, I call Helen Lovatt. That's the second best thing. It's great. So you were talking to me about work on emotions and grief and things like that. So I immediately started thinking about the Iliad, a poem of power, but also announced so early, a poem of rage, grief, other extreme emotions. You try to teach students what Achilles' attitude is, and rage doesn't always get at it, and you have to have a lot of synonyms for the different extreme approaches Achilles is taking to different situations. But anyway, it is a poem of extreme emotion. So in your work on grief, what is its relation to power?
Yeah, this got me thinking a lot. It sort of comes at the center of what it is I'm trying to do in the current project. So the current project is called The Power of Sadness in Virgil's Aeneid. So I'm focusing on Virgil. And there were reasons for that. I started from the idea that grief can be something that energizes you and makes things happen. And I was interested in post-traumatic growth and in resilience, both of which are really interesting for thinking about the Aeneid, where Aeneas has suffered an enormous amount and then goes on to achieve great things. But I'm also interested, most of the interpreters of the Aeneid tend to focus on negative emotion as a cost of achieving power and rule, whereas I'm interested in the sort of reverse causal relationship, where it's because of all the terrible things that have happened to him that he ends up being able to achieve what he achieves. And this is a sort of inverse, maybe an inverse sort of causality to what's going on in the Iliad to an extent, although obviously Virgil also replays the Iliad. So it's, when I was thinking about why I wouldn't use, if I was doing this project on the Iliad, it would be different.
Sure.
But also, in some ways, it would still be possible. It would just be possible in a different way. And that comes down, I think, to understanding of epic causation. That the complexity and multi-layered nature of the ways that things are sort of folded into each other. So that one element of loss then leads to another. And it's often the desire for power that causes the loss. So I started off thinking that it was mostly going to be about the positive psychology angle, but I'm now pulled away from that more towards a sort of a more of a ambivalent approach, where I'm looking both at the constructive and the destructive elements of grief experience and behavior in the epic context, and how they relate to power. So, and also how they affect people's ability to have power and agency, but also how the existence of power structures affects the experience and behavior of grief. So if you're in, like, for instance, in the Aeneid, Pallas's father gets to express his grief and then change things and call for revenge, and it's done. Whereas Euryalus' mother, expresses her grief, everyone's horrified and shoves her out of the room. So it's not that they express or experience their grief differently, it's that the power structure around them shapes how people respond to it. And so this sort of sense of the gendering is quite interesting as well.
Right. But reflecting on what you've said with respect to the Iliad, I want to ask about how the negative emotions that Achilles feels, and the extreme, states that Achilles gets himself into, about whether you see their constructive element or if you only see their destructive, because most people dwell on the destructive nature. The Iliad poet dwells on the destructive nature of Achilles' wrath. But however, Achilles in the poem gets what he was promised. He gets it. In the games, the games is the greatest evidence and manifestation of the fact that he gets the thing that he was promised.
He gets the thing that he was promised, but is that thing devalued in the getting?
Sure, great, good question. Yeah, but anyway, so you do see it. You see it.
He takes Troy. Metonymically, he takes Troy.
You see a positive, a constructive element of it, but still, the poem is intending for us to reflect on how destructive and murderous and all this was, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And but also, I mean, it's not wrong, the choice. There isn't a wrong, is there? It's not a this is wrong, this is right. It's a this happens.
Right. These are things that could happen in war, in these kind of high stakes struggles.
And
And
the
yeah,
particular desire for power and status is such an important force in the world,
right.
and how people negotiate that in their sort of decision about where they want to be in the world, how much power
Right.
they are willing to take, how much power they are
Yeah.
willing to hold. And that,
Right.
the trade-off is, if you're not willing to actually have that power, then somebody else is going to have it over you. And that's another thing that people maybe don't tend to think of it in that way.
But Achilles in life didn't seem to enjoy having anybody over him.
No.
And so it's like, what kind of life did he want? Did he want to stay home and not get involved in the power struggles of his day? Well, that didn't seem to really be his character, right? So
No,
he wanted
that's
to
more
be
Odysseus.
Yeah, sure. That's right. Off on his island, wherever that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or pretending to be mad.
That's right. That's right. But so, I think we get Homerists kind of wanting to lean one way or the other, mostly about the negative of the negative emotions.
Yeah.
And I often find that those arguments are kind of over-argued in that direction and don't appreciate the fact that the story is also celebrating the victory of Achilles over everything that stood in his way.
Yeah.
That's quite remarkable. As it says how destructive that kind of pursuit and his character was. So, yeah.
I mean, this is interesting to me. I've just been looking at my family history after Remembrance Sunday. I posted about my great uncle who died in the Great War, and he was somebody who volunteered. He signed up, and he lied about his age, so he was only 16 when he went to war, fighting for his country, and he was captured as a dispatch rider with an ambulance convoy. So he was doing something that he thought was valuable, and it's very easy to focus on the misery of the people who were left behind, but also that they supported him. He chose it. It was a decision to fight for justice as far as he was concerned.
Yeah.
And war is a very complex thing.
Yep.
It's not. It is or can be evil, but it also can be essential.
That's right.
And
I agree with that.
It's a matter of being honest about the complexity of these decisions, I think.
That's right. Well, I think both the Iliad and what we call in Canada Remembrance Day, which was yesterday here, I think they're both demonstrations of the fact that war is something that everyone loses. You pursue goals through war, and you might get those or not, but you're going to lose. You're going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody loses. And the Iliad tells us that. I like to emphasize the victory for Achilles that is narrated in the Iliad. I like to emphasize that because everyone in my exaggerated hyperbole, everyone ignores that fact. They treat him like a bad influence, a bad boy, somebody who's behaving incorrectly. But that doesn't get the point of the Iliad.
Yeah, his extremity is also his heroic stature. So yeah. I mean, it's the grief for Patroclus that drives him to another level of epic achievement, to actually fight the gods themselves.
That's right. Interesting. You and I share an interest in children's literature. I've been teaching a senior English seminar on the subject since 2019. Has units on influence of folk tale, like ethnographic folk tale and Greek and Roman mythology. So you've surveyed quite a lot of children's literature. I follow your work there. You're often posting about children's stories, having some classical element in it. And I'm curious how Homeric are those classical influences in children's literature, because my initial reading is that they're not particularly Homeric. There are sort of other mythologies that are more influential there. I mean, other Greco-Roman myths are more influential on the artists who are choosing to adapt them in children's literature. What do you think?
I mean, it's a big question because there's a lot of children's literature. And
Sure.
I guess the anthology type is probably the first thing people will think of when they're thinking about Greek and Roman children's literature, and that inevitably, because of its sort of catalogue type nature, is going to be more Hesiodic. Although I think there's the Robertson Murnaghan line is that in fact most of it is more Ovidian.
Yes.
And I think that is probably true. But on the other hand, there is a significant element right from the beginnings of children's literature of an interest in sort of intense narrative, escapism, fantasy, going beyond normal bounds, and also obviously in masculinity.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, if you look back at things from the 19th century, there is a lot of Homeric material right from the beginning, and there still is now. I'm just reading a book called The Odyssey of Phoebe Quilliam by Annalise Gray, and I'm working my way through her stuff because we're organising an author event with her for the module in a couple of weeks' time, and she's also written a great series about chariot racing. In fact, the Circus Maximus.
Oh my God, I would love that so much.
Oh, you should read those. They are really good. Yeah. They are really good. But yeah, so the Odyssey of Phoebe Quilliam is going to that, the heart of the Homeric mythology element of children's literature, which does tend to be Odyssean, to focus on journeys and encounters, marvelous encounters and monsters. Yes. But there is a lot of it. So maybe it's just more that it's the Iliadic elements that are less common in children's literature. Yeah. Because they are so emotionally complex, challenging. Mm-hmm. Although there are a lot of war stories in children's literature, that's definitely not something that people shy away from.
Yeah, I think Iliadic aesthetics, and I'll say also Homeric aesthetics about how you should put a story together are prominent in children's adaptations, Harry Potter and others. Yeah. But that's sort of like, it's basically like the influence of Aristotle and his poetics and saying what makes a good story. And he talks about the Iliad and what is good about the structure of the Iliad and stuff like that in the poetics. And I think those ideas are the things that children's authors are thinking. Yes, I want to have a story that begins in the middle of things. Mm-hmm. And there's a sort of
strong focalization and a strong hook.
Yeah, right. A tightly bound circumstance where there's a conflict. Yeah. There's a protagonist and an antagonist, and the protagonist's moves are tightly constrained by various other circumstances. And so what is he gonna do? Oh no, like this, which is Homeric.
I think one of the things that's interesting about children's literature is it has to be a lot tighter. There isn't much room for leisurely sort of explorations of things. Your audience is totally unforgiving. And I think that can, in a lot of cases, that can make it better.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And the multi-layered nature of the readership as well. The fact that almost all children's literature is going to be read by both children and adults, because most reading will happen with or through or because of parents. So you've got a lot going on there. I mean, Rick Riordan is very influential at the moment. Most of my students absolutely love the Percy Jackson series. And I guess Rick Riordan is more of he does have his Odyssean moments, but he's probably more of an Ovidian sort of Hesiodic writer. On the whole, he just loves the systematic nature of Greek myth. He just loves the weird sort of way out things. Although
the genealogies, he likes the genealogies and like that. Yeah.
Heroes of Olympus does have an overall Argonautic framework.
I believe that. Argonautic framework, you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's got Argo 2 as the main vehicle. It's got a hero called Jason as the main one of the group of protagonists.
Cool. Which work is this?
This is the second series in the Percy Jackson. So you've got the first one, which starts with the Lightning Thief. Heroes of Olympus is sort of aimed at a slightly older readership, and it also has a Roman. It has some protagonists in the Greek camp and some protagonists in the Roman camp. So there's Camp Jupiter as well as Camp Half-Blood. My daughter made me read it all.
Sounds like fun. Sounds like fun anyway. When we were talking about preparing for this Homer hotline, you mentioned liminality, and that's interesting. There's a broad topic. I'm always thinking about it in respect to Homeric studies because of the liminal position people put themselves in, such as Achilles or Odysseus. In fact, they're going into the liminal in their respective epics is so important. It's so central, right? The one goes into the liminal and is lost at sea. The other goes into the liminal and is rage rejecting all the people that he once so powerfully supported, and then they somehow have to be reincorporated. But anyway, so what is your thinking about liminality? How does liminality engage what you're working on?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm developing a new lecture on it for the module. This is the second time I've run the module, and I had a couple of slots with some space. Yay! And I've been reconfigured the module as a portal narrative story, basically. So the idea is the students go into this world of children's literature and classics, and then they find their own thing to be fascinated by. And then eventually they come out the other end, hopefully with a project. And so I thought I would look at this. And also the other reason why I became interested in it is because I've been working quite a bit on Ursula Le Guin recently.
Okay. I know who that is. I haven't read very much. Yes.
So she is a very well-known science fiction and fantasy author who grew up in an anthropological household. So both her father and mother were anthropologists, and she has a lot of literacy and understanding of. So when she comes at the ancient world, she comes at it through this comparativist anthropological background. So her novel Lavinia is one that is putting the early Romans into a sort of broader context of pre-modern peoples. So and particularly she's very interested in Californian Indian culture. And so I came at Le Guin thinking about the importance of liminality in the Earthsea books, where in particular the wall between life and death is a really prominent image. But the area that I'm going to be exploring in this lecture is her. I see her career as having sort of two spirals, like the interlocking spirals in Always Coming Home, which is the sort of central work of her career, and she wrote a trilogy of young adult books in the later spiral called Annals of the Western Shore, Gifts, Voices, Powers, and that one, she was already very interested in Rome at that point when she was writing it. She was building up towards Lavinia, which came a couple of years later, and you can tell this from the sort of Roman coded elements in both Voices and Powers. And Powers traces the story of an enslaved boy who escapes from a sort of villa/plantation type situation, and it ends with him carrying a child across a river. And I think, so the river is, for me, that is a really interesting reversal of the Anaros episode in the Argonautica.
Okay.
And I'm thinking about river crossing and the importance of that in defining someone's sort of adulthood or their life, actually. I mean, because you've obviously got the river Styx as well. So mortality, the transition point between childhood and adulthood is often sort of mirrors the transition point between life and death. And that, of course, is famously the case for a lot of the characters that die in epic, where they die on the point of manhood.
Yes.
And so that sort of the moment of greatest risk of going out into the world and taking your place in the world, and also being the moment of being most likely to die.
Sure.
So I guess that's what I'm thinking about. What I'm going to do is, throw it at the students and see what they come up with. But
yeah, it reminds me of the turning post in the chariot race.
Yes, well, I was always very fascinated.
See, rushing out to the turning post of the chariot race is not the hardest part of the
turn.
It's going around that post and the kind of crush of humans, horses, and cars that happens there.
The shipwrecks.
And then whether you can get back after that. It's a very life and death metaphor. And as you say, childhood, adulthood. And of course, in our authoritative and earliest example of the chariot race, we have a young man on the point of manhood who then stands up for himself, and all this. Yes. Antilochus. Yes. So there's a lot there. That's where my
Annalise Gray's books have loads of lovely turning point moments. I got to say, the Circus Maximus series is she really, really knows her chariot racing.
Turning point is an interesting phrase, because it's interesting because I titled this article Troy as Turning Post.
Right.
And when people refer to the article, they almost always get the last word wrong and say Troy as turning point, because in their minds, right, it gets assimilated to a more familiar idiom. But no, you have to know what a turning post is. Nestor will tell you, it's cool. So our stories just they require liminality as the concept is understood in scholarship. They require liminality in order to achieve their narrative ends all the time. So we have these formulaic episodes in epic, like a catabasis, which is a liminal experience. And I'm trying to think of this.
A lot of interest at the moment.
Yeah, right. I mean, the last 20 years and catabases, so much has been published, maybe spurred on by the publications on the gold leaves, the Orphic lamellae, 20 years ago. I wonder if there are other set piece epic constructions, like episodes that every epic has, that are liminal, because an Aristeia has liminal moments.
Well, I guess you've got arrival and departure scenes in all of the. So I'm quite interested in beaches.
The literal limen.
Yeah, very literal.
Yeah,
but there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them.
Yes, that's right.
There's epiphanies. They often have a lot of emphasis on arrival and departure too.
That's right. I call those theophanies.
But
yes, yeah. When the gods show up, inherently necessarily liminal, because all of a sudden the border between the worlds has dissolved, and now the gods are there with you. Yeah. So there's a lot. There's just so much that could be characterized with that word, and all the threat of death that is implied there is interesting in this discussion, because it seems like the liminal in what we're talking about really is closely bound with the threat of death.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, funerals, I guess, in that you're there in the space between life and death, talking between the two.
Right.
Prophecy is liminal in that you are talking to another world and there is risk involved. Yeah. But there's lots more to think about. But
do prophets, so there's a prophet in the Aeneid that meets a bad end. That priest of Neptune, Laocoon.
Oh yes,
meets a bad end
perfect
for prophesying.
Wherever there has been one, I mean, they're literally dragging the Trojan horse up into the city, and he is, I mean, he doesn't actually. Helen, let me get this right.
Does he prophesy? The question is, does he prophesy there? I don't know, or does he just warn?
Yes. Well, I mean, he tries to penetrate the horse. So, well, he does, in fact, penetrate the horse, but not enough to make a difference. So you're right. He's not really in a prophetic role there.
Well, he says, hear me. This is I forget the exact valence of what he says. If it's like I heard from the gods and this is what's happening, or it's a don't trust it. We don't know what it is, because I know he says, I fear the Greeks, and all that, but I don't know if it's prophetic. But anyway,
it's a little bit mixed up in my head because I'm currently examining a thesis on Quintus Mannaeus, who's got a different version of the scene.
Are there other prophets? So like Calchas in the Iliad, his prophecy really is a deadly threat to himself, and he's scared of speaking it.
I'm thinking of him in Aulis as well.
In Roman epic, do we have the same fear attached to prophets?
Yes. I mean, like Amphiaraus, when he's trying to tell in the Thebaid, when he's trying to tell everyone, don't go to war, we're all going to die. But he's also saying, I know you're going to go to war, so you're not going to listen to me. We're all going to die. But also, you might just kill me now. Please don't kill me right now, because I'm not supposed to die quite yet. And Capaneus is there, keen to go to war and willing to kill him if he doesn't say the right thing.
Right.
So yes,
so it really is. So prophecy really is liminal. These prophets really are liminal, not just in that. Yeah, well, yes, in that.
And Amphiaraus actually ends up going down into the underworld in an earthquake. Right.
So not only have they broken the border, because they're not saying, I will consult the gods. They're saying, I consulted and this is what I learned. I have a message from the gods, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the difference between performing a necromancy and actually going to the underworld is really unclear.
Absolutely.
So
especially
I mean,
in the Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly. What Odysseus does in the Odyssey is much closer to what Tiresias is doing in Thebaid 10. So the idea of it's no coincidence that you've got both the Sibyl prophesying and them going down to the underworld in Aeneid 6. It's the things are bound up together.
Yes. And then they go to the underworld to get prophecies, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Anchises gives a prophecy. Tiresias, it's kind of a prophecy. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. All right, let's go on to this next thing. When we first met was at a nice CAC. And I think you were invited by my friend Kyle Gervais. And we had a short chat, you and me, about large-scale folktale types. I like this. I like this work. Arne Thompson, Uther. I know its applicability to what we do is limited. I understand that, but nevertheless, I like engaging with it. But I think you have a different approach to large-scale formulaic elements. in Latin and Greek epic. And when I say large scale, like something like withdrawal, devastation, return, right? Really, a theme that will link many books of an epic. Is talking about large scale stuff like this. So I think of them in terms of folktale types, and you said something like, I used the word mythemes. And then, so I just want to throw it to you. So what do you think about mythemes, Uther, folktale types? What is your approach? How does it sounds like your approach to this is not folkloristic, it's something else. So I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, because folklore, there's a definition of mytheme in the folkloristic tradition, which is specific. So I've been thinking about this, and it's definitely a direction that I could have got more out of. And the comparative elements in particular, I think using it as a research tool that opens up a lot of comparative material would have been interesting.
Yeah.
I think my problem with this is when I was working on the Argonaut book, where I was basically trying to do a cultural history of Argonauticas, and I had to find ways of making it manageable. And one of them was to mainly look at complete versions. And another one was to sort of focus more on the vertical than the horizontal. So I was looking at the relationships across time, maybe more than comparison across different cultures.
Yes.
And so I can see, although I suppose I was also thinking about the ways that folktale type as a methodology is all about, as far as I understand it, about categorizing.
Yeah.
And
cataloging.
Exactly, which I'm not, it's a really useful thing to do and can be really interesting. And you can really argue about where the boundaries lie for different things. But I guess I'm someone who tends to think of genre as something that is negotiated and performed rather than a pigeonhole that you can put something into. So
Yeah. The linking of the stories under headings in Arne Thompson Uther is utterly artificial. That's for us. There's nothing about the natural world or about human culture that kind of puts together or finalizes, because they're pretty arbitrary. What links one tale to another, the things that the scholars see as binding the tales together in a type, you could make a different choice and look at other aspects and bind them together differently. And if you're honest about how the tales relate to one another, it's not linear and like that. It's kind of fractal like. And so I acknowledge that. But I reflect on something. I don't think I'll name this classical scholar who told me this, but he said, we have computers now, so we don't need Germans. And what he meant by this was like these reference works that compile all examples of X together are incredibly useful for us. And it used to be a tradition in German scholarship, but now we have databases, and so we don't need Germans anymore and all that. And anyway, I don't believe any of that, but it's a funny thing to say.
I did toy with the idea of putting together a database of the Argonaut versions.
But so Arne Thompson Uther is such a useful database of tales. Because the bibliography is all right there. You look up the tale type, and then you've got 100 versions from every continent. And it's very exciting, and I enjoy that.
I think that's how I think about digital searching as well, as a starting point. So when you're looking, so if you're using Tesserae, which allows you to trace the way where words and phrases overlap between a different book of one epic and another, that's a starting point. It takes you towards thinking about meaning. But I don't know. I mean, I am really interested in the question of what is the limit of a connection? Where does it stop being interpretable? And that's what I was talking about at that CAC. I was talking about the grey area between clear classical reception and something that couldn't be interpreted as classical reception.
Do you want to know? Yeah. Can I tell you
And
the standard?
I have a model for that, which is the combination of shape and tell. So this is like, so you sort of need the structure, the sort of similarities of narrative movement, and then you also need some specific thing that actually signals it to a reader, which I see in terms of the heist. Yes. It's a trick that reveals itself.
The standard I apply in my work, which is just something that I find convincing, is 3 narrative moves in a row. So that's the minimal, that establishes the minimal pair. So the tales aren't usefully comparable in order to demonstrate anything.
Yeah.
Unless they have 3 homologous narrative moves in a row. And then I think, okay, well, there might be a relationship of dependency here, but that's the minimum. That's the minimum.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that I'm not that bothered about intentionality, which does shake things up a bit. So I'm more interested in interpretability.
Yes. Well, it kind of lets yourself off the hook.
Yeah.
When you don't talk about intentionality. I mean, yeah.
Because authors have all sorts of stuff going on in their heads when they're writing.
That's right.
They won't necessarily be thinking about it. And
no.
Even if you actually talk to the living author, which I can do with these children's books, someone like Caroline Lawrence will tell you if she was thinking of something else, and she has a very good memory. But there are other people like Le Guin, for instance, who are going to operate on a more sort of imagistic or a subconscious type level. Yeah. And it's and we'll say, oh, I'd never thought of that, but yeah, it's definitely there.
Very cool. So another thing, I was writing about transitions between scenes in epic, like the philological characteristics of transitions. And you got in touch with me when I was doing that and asked about what kinds of transitions I was looking at and stuff like that. So I see that you have an interest in skynometry or scenometry or whatever, how long narratives knit themselves together. Can you tell me about where those ideas appear in your work and what your impression is of the aesthetics of Latin authors in epic as they arrange their scenes? What do they think is good about how they arrange their scenes?
Yeah, good question. So I've written a piece on narrative transition in Statius, where it was part of a project on intertextuality in Flavian epic. So it sort of follows on quite nicely from what we were talking about before. And we were particularly investigating digital searching methods and the sort of limits and problems of using it. And so what I was doing was to think about structural intertextuality as something that's very hard to search for. So. And yes. The folktale types, I guess, is one of those ways of moving beyond that. But I was interested in whether there were particular sort of verbal markers for transition that could then be used to sort of mark beginnings and ends and think about how they play with them and what's going on. And there sort of were and there sort of weren't. So it was a very I talked to Irene de Jong about it, and she was like, "This is great. You should write. You should do this." But I have not taken it any further. But I was interested in the Epic Gaze, the book about a sort of narratology of vision, really, in epic. That was, I think, one of the most striking things that came out of that book was this idea, was the way that the divine gaze has a tendency to structure the movement from one scene to another in a way that means even though God's looking at things is quite a small number of instances, the moments where it occurs are so important and so structurally significant that it really is a sort of central marker of what it is to be epic, to have this divine audience.
Were there any philological distinctions that marked those places where the gods watch?
What do you mean by philological distinctions?
I mean, like diction changes in the way that the line which introduces the gods watching maybe begins or ends, or anything about
Sometimes there are formulaic phrases that
right, as there are everywhere.
As there
And
are everywhere, but I don't
is
see that as
there
a diction change. No.
yeah, well, exactly. So I can track diction changes in the Iliad, where there's certain transitional phrases
Yeah.
or certain structures of transitional clauses,
Right.
which are not repeated in the less significant transitions, and only these
Yeah,
deluxe,
yeah.
extremely important transitions have this
Yeah.
philological character. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I mean, yes, in Latin. Because I was looking at Statius when I was doing the narrative transition thing, and there are definitely strong and weak transitions.
Right.
And then there are also sort of blurrings as well. So or zooming in and zooming out. So there are different sort of models of transition. It's not always that you just move from one scene to another. Sometimes you move to a different level or type of narrative. But that something like I'm trying to remember the words now. It's been a while, but at, for instance, is a word that I associate with strong transition.
That's cool. So looking for at line beginning, in Roman epic might bring you to some significant lines and significant transitions. So that's important. It's just like in Homer, looking for the word autar at the beginning of a line as transitional. It will also lead you to some of the most significant places in the epic.
Yeah.
Interesting that those are probably cognate. Interesting for our poetic tradition that those things are probably cognate in some sense.
I feel like interlinguistic sort of connections like that are still not underdone. People don't work across the two cultures.
Yeah, you have to be old-fashioned like me. Yeah. The aesthetic
question. The aesthetic question.
Yeah.
That is also interesting, and I was thinking about that particularly in relation to the Flavian authors, where Statius, for instance, tends to have quite strong beginnings to scenes, but to blur towards the end. So he's someone who sort of gets distracted.
He likes to play a little game. He likes to play a little game between the one scene and the other scene. But because my experience
he blurs words as well. So
my experience of I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, his general aesthetic is one that is often quite hard to pin down. There's a lot of equivocation and complexity and multi-layers. Sorry.
Because of my grad training, I'm more familiar with the Sylvae than I am with Statius Epic. I think that there might have been some games in transitions between poems in the Sylvae. That is, as you move from one to the other, there were some funny intertextualities between poem end and poem beginning. But I might be misremembering. Anyway,
that's an interesting thought. I have not investigated that. That sounds fun.
I think he likes these little games.
Yeah, there's that. And it is interesting that Silius is quite different, I think. I feel like Silius is someone who does like to quite define beginnings and ends, and is more of a sort of epigrammatic poet. So although his poem is extremely long, it's composed of quite small parts, often.
Interesting.
So
that's interesting to me.
Sort of fragmented.
Homer is kind of like that.
Whereas
a nice Homeric period. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Whereas Valerius Flaccus is very Escherian. Everything folds into itself. So a lot of the time, it's quite hard to figure out where you are and whether you are transitioning or not. So I I looked at Delirious through the idea of the strange loop.
Well,
it's a sort of mise en abîme that folds into itself.
Yes, it's clear to me that the Roman epicists are playing with transitions quite a bit.
Yes.
And they think that the transition is a place for poetic elaboration where they have an opportunity to make their mark, to be individualistic.
Well, I think it's inevitable when you're writing Latin poetry is such an involved thing to do.
Sure.
It's so difficult.
It's hard,
complex.
yeah.
And
yeah,
so,
I've only in my life only composed a few hexameter lines and in Latin, and I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like doing it. It's hard. No, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that. So I'll end with the final question is maybe a little bit more personal. So you gave this talk about all the Argonauticas at the CAC, and you were also talking about disability in academia and in your personal life. So that's kind of a hot topic. And I thought I'd give you a chance to say what you want to say about disability and our field or disability studies, because this is, people who say I do critical disability studies, those people were probably born in like the year 2000 or after. But that's a hot topic all across academia these days. And you've thought about it. So I wonder what you'd share with us today.
Well, it is something that I'm very interested in. I mean, I'm interested in lots of other things too, but at least I have an authentic experience to add to this, and that does seem to be quite important when you're doing critical X studies. And nothing about us without us. So I'm actually running a couple of events coming up on disability in children's literature about Greece and Rome. So I'm going to be talking to Caroline Lawrence about her disabled characters, and also to Annalise Gray about hers as well. And one of the things that is interesting to me is the different ways that disability works in the ancient world. And I was thinking about that partly also because I have a PhD student called Imogen Clark, who is working on dysfunctional bodies in Marshall's epigrams, and particularly the relationship between the dysfunctional body and poetics. So she came into it wanting to do something about disability studies. Then when we decided to think hard about what it meant to interpret Marshall in his own terms, it's very hard to apply a concept of disability. So we moved outwards towards a more open concept of bodies that don't work, which works in both contexts. But anyway, that has revealed some fascinating stuff. And I think one of the things about the ancient world is that disability would have been just generally much more common. So in some ways, it's just a much more normal thing. It's
just everywhere. It's
just everywhere, exactly. But in other ways, society is much less tolerant of it because you need to be functional in order to survive. So you've got this sort of extremely toxic treatment of, say, Claudius, for instance, even though he's obviously powerful and has a lot of privilege, so he can survive. So that's maybe why he is a visible disabled person. But on the other hand,
right. Yeah, that's right.
But on the other hand,
to be a visible disabled person, you're going to have to be male and rich and whatnot in the ancient world.
Well, yes and no, because everyone is surviving as best they can. And that is one of the weird things about being disabled, is that I remember once asking someone what's the term for the people who don't think of themselves as disabled? And my friend said, not yet disabled.
Yeah,
and that's right. In some ways it's everyone has limits, and it's a matter of negotiating between what society expects and what your body and brain can do, and because the expectations were very different in the ancient world, what is disabling is very different in the ancient world. So
that's right.
as well as not having much functional medicine, they also, it wasn't a problem in the ancient world if you couldn't drive, because because nobody had a car, so it was fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like giving up driving for me was an immense moment, because it felt like handing back my adulthood. But it would have been, and also, like, say, not being able to read. I can't really read physical hard copy books anymore, but most people in the ancient world couldn't read, and they would have had other people to read for them.
Yeah. We in the modern world have certainly invented many disabilities that didn't exist.
Yeah,
I mean, like dyslexia didn't exist among illiterate populations and whatnot.
We've asked an awful lot of ourselves, I think, in many ways. Although we have also a lot of technology to help ourselves with things, we've also created a lot of problems. So it's one of these weird things that actually, in some ways, the ancient world might have been an easier place to be disabled.
If your vision is very poor, well, you're going to be one of the people who carries out the profession that doesn't require lots of vision, like maybe a mason.
Yeah,
or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, or if you're short-sighted, you might have been a tailor.
Yeah,
where a lot of short-sightedness was required, essentially.
Right.
So it's and also, like, it's really interesting when I got my genetics done, because my eye condition is called retinitis pigmentosa. It's a genetic condition, and I'm actually what's called a carrier of X-linked, so it's come down the female side of my family. And the consultant there was like, well, in the past we thought carriers didn't have any symptoms, but it turns out quite a lot of them do. And I was like, yeah, that will be because they were women and they were in the home and they were not important, so nobody cared that they couldn't see very much. They just got on and cooked the food anyway, because you can do that.
In my personal life, me and my wife are dealing with still the lag in medicine on women. We have this medical system that's built on the idea that the human norm is the male body. And then women are just abnormal. They're just weird men. And so if we just do a study on men, we'll get all the medical. And so there's just like depression and heart attack and blah, 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 all these symptoms. In women, they're not as well known. So sorry, the conditions, right? What the symptoms of those conditions are in women are not as well known as the symptoms of those conditions in men. And that goes across the board. There's so many ailments that are like that, disabilities that are like that. And so the medical people, we have these people in our media universes who say that feminism isn't necessary or something like that anymore. But there's a lot of undone work to bring sort of societies or the world's approach to women up to the par that it is for men. So there's a lot that'll take a very long time. Medicine is a major area where they just didn't do studies on women because that didn't matter.
Yeah. So it is interesting, and obviously that's going to mean that a lot of our material on disability in the ancient world, of course, is going to be hampered by the fact that disabled people just generally don't have much of a voice. So
that was my point about Claudius earlier, was that in order to be recorded as a disabled person in antiquity, if you're rich and male and like from a ruling family, you're very likely to have had something about your disability recorded if people were writing histories about you or something like that.
But it is also another thing that is a real problem, is the sort of moralizing nature of the interpreting of disability. So it's really hard. It's really hard in Marshall to look at the representations of dysfunctional bodies and not interpret it in moral terms.
Because Marshall thinks it's moral.
I'm not sure that he does, or Marshall's attitude to morality is pretty complex, but he certainly is playing with common Roman ideas about, like you're being punished, or this displays your inner sort of failure to live properly. You have you have pain in the hands and feet, you must have drunk too much wine.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which may be true, but actually people quite often have pain in the hands and feet from, say, doing a lot of writing, or
That's right.
So yeah, it is very interesting. And
when I think about disability in Marshall, I think the comparanda is the satirists, because I think the idea of the dysfunctional body, that really, if you want Roman authors who are writing about what's wrong with people, it's the satirists.
Yeah, originally she was going to do Marshall and Juvenal, but it was too much.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what engagements there are there, however. That's what I wonder about. That's my little feedback about working on this in Marshall. What satiric poets Marshall might be engaging with in his.
I think it is really important to study disability in the ancient world, though, because it does bring you into contact with lived experience in a very visceral way. And it is also really important to have different marginalized conditions or marginalizing conditions sort of represented in things that we do, because otherwise people just forget that they exist.
There you go. Helen Lovatt, Professor at Nottingham, thank you for being on the Homer Hotline today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Kevin. And thanks for talking to me about all sorts of things that weren't Homer as well.
This is just very fun for me. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. And the Bard has left the chat.
You've been listening to the Homer Hotline with Dr. Kevin Soles. The Bard has left the chat. Like, subscribe, hit the bell.